Here's something that definitely looks great.
Let's reboot, finish the game, and get out of here.
The fantastic reboot's coming up next. Make sure you don't miss it, folks. It's mind-blowing.
Warning, incoming game.
Hello! This is Bloobcast. I'm Ewan.
I'm Rob.
And I'm James. But the question is, why are we the Bloobcast?
Yes!
Yeah!
Yes.
Yes. It's rather good, isn't it?
Okay, so today, this is our 25th episode of Bloobcast, so thank you to everybody who's stuck with us for this long. But today, because it's a kind of milestone, we are taking a look at my all-time favourite TV show, the 90s CGI series, ReBoot.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about this show.
I'm aware there's probably a few people who are dedicated listeners of ours who have probably heard me talking about ReBoot but have no idea what ReBoot is. So ReBoot was the first full-length TV series to be produced using CGI, and it ran for 4 seasons from 1994 to 2001. The series was primarily set inside the computer system known as Mainframe and followed the adventures of Bob, a guardian from the supercomputer, alongside Dot Matrix, a local entrepreneur, and her younger brother Enzo, as they battle the computer viruses Megabyte and Hexadecimal, alongside the games inputted into the system by the user. These games drop onto random sections of the city, and those trapped inside need to reboot into a character from the game and battle the user. Otherwise, that section of the city will be destroyed, and the citizens trapped inside get turned into parasitic worm-like creatures known as nulls. And while the show started out with more light-hearted, episodic, kid-friendly episodes, over the course of its run it began to tell darker, more sophisticated stories with a heavier focus on continuity.
Yeah. You know, the idea that Bob is combating this user, a mysterious and possibly divine entity with a tragic backstory and epic heroic characteristics, it kind of reminds me of how Satan defies God in Paradise Lost. Reboot's one of those shows that vilifies God.
Not even 5 minutes in!
No, not finished!
I'm not taking the bait, James. I will say there's a fun bit of the intro of ReBoot where he talks about the user inputs games for pleasure. Nobody knows if this is true, but I'm prepared to find out. And then he never finds out. And that whole plot point is just completely dropped.
They say the user lives outside the net and inputs games for pleasure. No one knows for sure, but I intend to find out. Reboot!
So basically the users are humans. They are us, but yeah, they never feature. The entire story is set entirely in the computer world, as it were. So it's basically Tron, but if the humans never came into Tron and it was all just that Tron world, that kind of I'm explaining this to people who like literally they'll be listening in and going like, what? So
the show massively reminds me of 10-pin bowling strike animations in the best way, which is a good thing. So I love those animations. Just don't get me wrong, please. It's just...
Okay, no, I can see it. That's what you get for being the first ever CG animated show, where you literally first you get to be in the Smithsonian as the first animated show. So well done to them. But also, you look like a bowling animation, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Although to be fair to the show, I mean, it looks better than some shows that came after it around the same time. Like in our Beatles episodes, I briefly mentioned this, but we had a couple of years after ReBoot, we had this cartoon called Donkey Kong Country based on Donkey Kong.
I've seen that.
It looks absolutely atrocious, and it came out after ReBoot.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, you showed me Ace Lightning was a show, and that
God.
was appalling.
It's hard to take a stand. It's hard to do what's right. No matter how scared you are, you have to stand and fight. And we don't have to play this game all alone.
Yeah, like ReBoot, I think what works in its favor, because it's set in this computer world, they had a very good excuse for the reason why the CG looks kind of weird is because it's in the computer world.
And that's exactly why they chose that setting, because so just as backstory for how the show came about. So in the mid 80s, there's two animators from England called Gavin, Blair and Ian Pearson, and they created the first CGI music video, which is for the Dire Straits song Money for Nothing. And after they made this video, which according to Gavin Blair took 3.5 weeks of hell, they recuperated in the pub. While they were doing this, Ian said to Gavin, "Hey, we could do a TV show like this." And Gavin was instantly like, "Oh, what? You're crazy. We just spent 3.5 weeks making a music video and it nearly killed us." And he thought, "Oh, he'll sober up and he's going to drop the idea." Short story, he didn't. Long story, the idea snowballed for a few years. They brought in a few more people, namely Phil Mitchell, who's a university colleague of Gavin's, and their lecturer John Grace, who had actually previously made a TV show for children called The Adventures of Portland Bill, which is a kind of like little stop motion series. And they were brought in to help develop the show. But then they realised it would have been too expensive for them to produce the show in the UK, so Gavin, Ian and Phil relocated to Vancouver, Canada to make the show due to like tax breaks for making TV shows in Canada at the time.
Oh my god, sorry, can I was about to make a joke about, there's a British guys who moved to Canada for tax reasons, and then you literally just said that. I didn't think that was gonna be the reason. So, sorry, that's very funny. Okay.
As I said, the decision to set the show inside a computer was due to the primitive nature of CG at the time, because of course the Dire Straits music video they made was really blocky, and they thought, people were like, "Why does it look like that?" And they said, "Oh, it's inside a computer." And they did some early tests which you can find on YouTube, and they look kind of like in between Dire Straits and what we got in the finished show. So the animation evolved over the years they were making the show.
Yeah, wasn't there a video of like a very early prototype kind of like Enzo character with his baseball cap, but he didn't have a mouth, and they were just making jokes about like, "Please give me a mouth," something like that. Yeah.
Oh yes, where Megabyte sounds like what's his name, Joe Pesci, and he's like, "I love to rumble and hate to fumble."
But it's not all fun and games, you know. We have responsibilities, like we have to keep the mainframe safe from bad data.
And the forces of chaos. That's me, Megabyte. I love to rumble and I hate to fumble. This is my partner, Hacker. Together we are real bad data. Our plan is to steal a whole bunch of data, get super intelligent, and take over the mainframe.
Yeah, that's what they think they're gonna do, but I think it's extremely unlikely. See ya. Psst, buy this show and they'll give me my lips back.
Yeah, there's like all of these, you can clearly see that's the character they're going for, but the animation was so crude at the time. Yeah, no, sorry, continue.
But you see the progression though between those sort of test clips. Like it looks, for the first one, there's like 4 of them, and the first one looks nothing like the current show. But then, like as it goes on and on, eventually like Hack and Slash looks like Hack and Slash, and Bob looks like Bob, and they do like use by the 4th test animation. You can look this up on YouTube. It does look very much like the current show. So it's nice to sort of see the animators kind of like just go through that creative process and stuff. And how they built themselves into it. I thought it was quite nice to see.
Well, the first episode, I think that took, what was it, like 9 months?
9 months or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like and this was after years of developing the actual technology and of course getting the show like together. But yeah, like it took 9 months, and then they said that like once they got the CGI and everything working, they could crank out an episode after like a few weeks or something like that.
Yes,
like
that is correct.
Was amazing. Yeah.
Although when they first started, they ended up behind schedule really quickly, where there's only like 4 episodes left to air. So I think they ended one episode with like because there was an episode, the 4th episode, which was the last episode they had at the time, which was the Medusa Bug episode. They had an original ending to that where the Medusa Bug came back and Megabyte froze everything, and in between that they showed these like bumpers where Bob's going around trying to stop this new Medusa Bug, and that was what they did in between new episodes. And then when they came back with new episodes, like Bob unfroze the system, and then the show went back to normal.
Yeah, I like the Medusa Bug episode because that's a good example of like an early episode of ReBoot where Basically, the bad guy produces this Medusa effect where they're able to freeze everyone, like in a statue, and it's a great use of like how they kind of cut corners in the animation, because obviously it's like, what's a really easy thing to animate? Everyone is frozen and they can't move and it's all still, and that's the main plot, and so it was really brilliant the way that they were able to work in these kinds of like shortcuts for the story into the animation, to give themselves a break, I guess. I'm not saying, I'm sure it was still difficult to animate, but obviously like once you have everyone just not moving anymore, that does help a little bit. So it was just funny that.
Yeah, the Medusa virus episode is deeply disturbing, actually. Like, seeing the characters being trapped into stone is like just truly just apocalyptic scenario. It could have ended really nastily.
It's very Simpson-like, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's probably the strongest early episode of the show, because I think the show took a while to find its footing, as I'll get into later. But before we get onto that, I think we've jumped right into this, so we should go and talk about how we discovered the show.
I feel like Rob is going to have to lead on this, because I think he's had the longest history here.
Yes,
I think
because
it's up to you, man. You gotta do it.
I brought these two into this reboot madness, so it's fair to explain. Like, because it's funny, this is like my all-time favourite TV show, and my discovery of it was through pretty much complete accident. So, like all great Bloobcast stories, we begin in that magical former bastion of the UK high streets, Woolworths.
Amazing.
I was about 3 years old at the time, so I can't remember exactly how this went down, but I came across this micro playset, which is in the shape of this red robot thing, and came with a green boy wearing a red baseball cap, a red and yellow dog, and these two robots, one red and one blue, and I called these robots Bouncy Spacemen, because they looked like they bounced because they were on little balls. And I think I don't remember what happened next, but yeah, we basically bought the toy, and then a few months later we were flicking through channels, and then there was a program with the two Bouncy Spacemen in, because I recognised it from the toy, I was like, oh, I want to watch the Bouncy Spacemen program. So we watched the rest of the episode. I remember seeing the green boy was in it with the dog, and then the green boy had a fight with this big red scary demon guy. And then we watched it again the next week, and I was somewhat confused because the dog was still there, but instead of the green boy we had this big buff green dude with a gun, and I didn't really understand that they were the same character. But in spite of this, I still enjoyed it and kept watching. And then around this time I started getting ReBoot action figures, and at the time I wasn't too sure who they were because they weren't in the episodes I watched, but now I knew there was this guy called Bob, the green boy was called Enzo, and there's this called Dot. And the bad guys were Megabyte and Hexadecimal, and as well as that, the Bouncy Spacemen were called Hack and Slash, and they worked for Megabyte. And around this time, my dad also bought me a VHS tape with some early episodes on, namely, which were the Quick and the Fed and the Medusa Bug, so I got to see what these characters were like. And then around February 1998, so I would have been 4, the show started airing on the TV again, and we started videotaping it. And these were, I think they're mostly repeats of episodes that had already been aired. But this was the moment where I first experienced continuity between episodes, because I was used to a lot of Jerry Hansen shows where it was each episode was its own story with no real continuity between the two. So this is my first kind of realizing, this is why Bob's not in it anymore, for example. But I didn't get to see the end of this show at the time, sadly, because ITV stopped showing it mid-season and never aired the rest, which I'm sure we'll get back to later, so put a pin in that. But every now and then, I watched the videotape I taped off the TV, go back to it. And every time I watched it, I'd get obsessed and wonder what happened to the show and where it went. Yeah. And I remember when I first got broadband internet when I was about 9 years old, just around, I think, 2002, 2003, I found this ReBoot website which had QuickTime videos of the opening credit sequences for the 3rd season. And they had clips from episodes I hadn't seen, which had my imagination just going wild, what's going to happen here? Or Matrix, is he going to fight Megabyte? And all that kind of stuff. But my full-blown obsession, I think, started when I was about 13, when I watched the video again. And I think while I enjoyed the show, I was appreciating it now more because it was more quote-unquote grown up than a lot of the other shows that I'd grown up with, and that was something I latched onto. Then discovered this site called YouTube, which was quite new at the time. So this was around 2006. Someone had uploaded the entire show, and this is pure 2006, 2007. I watched them on my Nintendo Wii browser and on my TV,
Amazing.
zooming in as far as I could. And
That's
this was
wild.
like pretty good timing, because a few months after I'd seen like the rest of the show, I heard whispers online that they were making a reboot film trilogy, and I was like, really? They're doing that? That's really cool. Never happened, but at the time it was really exciting, and I eventually discovered this web forum dedicated to ReBoot, and I was really excited that people, because growing up I was like pretty much the only person who knew this show. I was like, finally, I'm not the only person who obsesses over this show. So I signed up to this forum and I started contributing conversations on it. And so I wanted to shout out the Java Hut forums. Sadly no longer active, but that site made my teenage years a little more bearable. And I think another big thing is, in my second year of uni, one of the units that was available in my course was 3D animation. And because of my love of ReBoot, I signed up for that. And boy, 3D animation was hard. But yeah, just to close off, over the years, ReBoot has always been like a really important show to me, and it's one I always go back to regularly. Like, even if I'm just watching one episode for comfort viewing, binging like the whole of the third season, or just watching the whole series. But in 2019, I had this mad idea to do a blog reviewing every episode of the show. So every week I'd watch an episode, then write a blog post talking about my thoughts on it. And like, there's some things, if I did it again, I wouldn't do. Like, for some reason I thought I had to put lengthy episode synopsises in my blog posts, because I thought, oh, people who haven't seen the show are going to read these, and they'll read these posts and watch the show. But yeah, I wouldn't do that again. But yeah, I'm really proud of the blog aside from that. And yeah, you can still find it at lostinthenet94.blogspot.com. So, long story short, I bought a toy in a whim when I was 3 years old, stumbled across the TV show a few months later, and I've been a fan ever since. And I think I honestly could have gotten away with writing my notes for this without rewatching the show, but I'm not going to pass on the excuse to rewatch ReBoots.
Oh, well, that's great.
Your blog is an excellent example of how the internet has kept this show alive. Ironically, considering that it's set in the internet and in computers. Well, not ironically, but yeah. No, it's cool, and I did read your blog, Rob. It was what kind of got me interested in ReBoot, because I think you'd always talked about it, and you always brought it up at really odd points in conversation, and I would have no idea what you were talking about. You know, it'd be like me referencing Fallout to people. They just look at you and they just think, what are you talking about? You're like, oh yeah, Bob did this in a TV show, and I'm like, what are you talking about? But no, I was always intrigued, because you always talked about it, and then you did your blog, and I checked that out, and I thought, oh, okay, so it is like a proper, proper show, and it looked really cool, because I don't care how a show looks. I got that it looks pretty dated by today's standards, but like it had a style to it, which has held up really well, and yeah. So no, I was intrigued, and then Rob. So this was probably when I was about like, yeah, I don't know, 20. I was in my 20s at least at this point. I probably had just finished uni. But then I went over and I hung out with Rob at his place, and we did a ReBoot marathon. We didn't watch all the episodes, but we watched all the ones that Rob thought were relevant. So we kind of skipped over a lot of the kind of the early filler, as you mentioned, Rob. Like a lot of the early episodes, they weren't quite sure what they were doing, so it was kind of very Saturday morning cartoon show like format. They beat the bad guy every week, sort of thing. But then, as the show goes on, we get on to seasons 3 and 4. It's like, oh wow, there's an overarching story, and there's themes, and the characters change, and there's all this stuff going on, and it's a really fun, really clever show. What I think I like about it, and what I liked about, because this is Mainframe Entertainment, the guys who did this. They're the ones who did Beast Wars, right? As well. I'm making
that's correct.
Yes.
No, you're right.
So Beasties. Famously, and when the when I was watching the show for this in preparation, I was apparently watching a rip of like whatever the original screening of it was in Canada, because a thing kept coming up saying next up Beasties. So you can tell when it was on, you know. And anyway, so Beast Wars, what I like about that show and what I like about this show and what I like about Mainframe in general is that they respected their audience's intelligence, and the stories and the shows were a lot stronger for that, because they actually did allow for, I know the censors tried to stop this, but the stories actually did have a lot of weight to them. There was a lot of character, and you know, and it went into quite dark places sometimes, but ultimately it's still all kid friendly. You know, it's kid friendly in the same way that like Star Wars is kid friendly. You know, it's like, oh,
and
a little
Avatar
scary.
as well.
Yeah. A little scary, a little, you know, there's some scary stuff and some nasty stuff, whatever. But ultimately, it's like you're watching it and you're going, oh, yeah, no, this is cute. I can watch this with my kids. I was listening to a thing with the creator, or one of the creators, Gavin, Blair, and he was saying, yeah, like he would have letters from families, you know, like the parents and the kids. Yeah, we all watch it and we love the show, you know, we love watching it together, and you know, is that perfect kind of mix where it's like there's enough stuff in it for adults like us to watch it and be interested, and obviously kids just go nuts because they love the look of it and all of the style and everything like that. So yeah, but that's my, you know, it's all very recent for me compared to Rob. I never really came across it as a kid, I guess because I was growing up a little too late at that point, because it was 1994 to 2001, so I would have been like 6 when it ended, so you know, it's
and also it has not been seen on UK TV since 1998, so yeah, that's probably why you never came across it.
I would have been 3 years old. There was no way in hell that I would have ever seen it. So no, I'm very happy. Like I said, it's amazing that the internet has kept this show alive all this time, and there's a lot of love for it, and I think it's well deserved love. So anyway, James.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because I think, to be honest, coming to be introduced to ReBoot was kind of in the early stages of my friendship with Rob. At this point, I don't know what I was watching at the time. I think I was watching a cartoon show of sorts, and I had finished the cartoon show. I want to say it was possibly Avatar, actually, or Legend of Korra. And I posted somewhere on Twitter or something like, oh, I finished Korra, and then Rob would be like, oh, why don't you start ReBoot? Wink, wink. So there would be often like, I remember, to be fair, there was a time when I was first getting to know Rob, where like just quite regularly, Rob would be like, "So James, ReBoot, you gonna give it a go? Yeah." But I did give it a go.
Don't know if you remember, but early on in lockdown, we all did a viewing of some episodes together. I showed you, I think, the end of season 2, and you were like, "Oh, I like this, but I have no idea what's going on."
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty much right, actually. But to be fair, when I did watch it, and when I watched it again by myself as well, I recognise that I've actually seen this before, and I swear to God this is the same thing. There's a possibility of tangent of error here, but when I was really young, at the library, I used to be able to borrow VHS tapes, and this is where I borrowed the Red Wall movie, where it was basically the first few Red Wall cartoon episodes slapped together, and a bunch of other cartoons. There was like a Lego cartoon I picked up from there at one point. But there was this animation, a 3D animation on VHS, and I swear to God, it is the episode in Series 1 of ReBoot, where they're basically doing the racing episode. Because when I watched that again, you know when you kind of like feel like it's unlocking a memory in the back of your mind, like, oh, I do recognise
this.
this.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I saw that episode and thought, hold on, I have seen this before. But obviously as a kid, I just had no, again, like I did then when I was watching you guys, I had no idea what was going on. And as a kid, it kind of just was too intelligent for my little brain at the time. But then, obviously, I sat myself down upon Rob's recommendation. I watched the whole thing, and every single episode from Series 1 up until Series 4, and I loved it. I thought it was amazing. I thought that, you know, I'm a big fan of the... I mean, I know I made a joke about 10-pin bowling cartoons and stuff like that, but genuinely I kind of mean that in a way that's kind of... in the sense that it's kind of endearing in a way, because I do love those old classic animations that you get in PS1 cutscenes. I've mentioned before I love the Oddworld cutscenes. And you know, I kind of like that kind of jittery side of the animation. Maybe jittery is not the right word for it, but yeah, I've watched it a second time now. I've watched the show twice now, actually, from beginning to end, and both times I've really enjoyed it. I probably enjoyed it more the second time I watched it, actually, because I started picking out little bits that I thought were quite neat and interesting to talk about. But yeah, I know, I realise there's probably not as much to be said as with your guys' stories, but yeah, no, I thought it was a really good show. I'm glad Rob introduced me to it. I think I have a few notes that I've written down for this, but I think because this is mostly Rob's show, I'm going to probably not talk as much. I'm going to be bouncing more on his ideas, because I think he's got more interesting things to say, and there's a good chance that a lot of things I've written down will be things that he's got written down as well. So yeah, end it on that.
Yeah, I want to go on to season 1 now, because I think, especially kind of for newcomers, season 1 is kind of a rough place to start, because I think while the CGI gets better as it goes on, and it holds up better than some other shows from around the same time, like Ewan says, 8 the Lightning, which came out like nearly 10 years after Reboots did. Like, the lighting in season 1 particularly is really harsh. But yeah,
there's a lot of kind of very limited kind of style of storytelling.
Yeah, that's the thing. The stories are very simplistic and not as engaged. But season 1 is really charming, and the characters are all great, and it's got a great sense of humour. But there's a reason why the show wasn't as great as it gets later on. So when they started out, as they were busy trying to get the episodes completed and coming to grips with making the showrunners were outsourcing the scripts to writers in LA who came from a traditional animation background. So Gavin, Ian and Phil, who are the 3 main showrunners, had to jump through all these hoops just to talk to the writers to give notes on the scripts. And then the culmination of this was then they received a 52-page script for the episode that ended up as Wizards, Warriors and a Word from Our Sponsor, which is the one where they're going through all the dungeon and all the levels.
What? A thief? I'm not the warrior? I'm always the warrior.
Well, if you're not the warrior, then who is?
Da-da-da-da! Mike, the mighty warrior!
Tonight at 8.
And like the script had these things that were impossible to do in CG at the time, such as like wrapping vines, and it was very exposition heavy and mentioned things like battle carrots, and these things were not even in the script. So they thought, okay, we're not going to send the script away for more rewrites. We're just going to take the bits of the script that we like, take lines from other episodes, and then they introduced this feature that was present in the finished episode of the gauntlets going like level 2, level 10, just so they could like easily cut between all the bits they liked in the script, and so they could do these quick-paced action beats without showing how they got in and out the level. The end result of this episode really impressed Jenny Treehouse, who was the head of ABC at the time, and I think the episode even won some kind of award. And because she liked this episode so much, because it was like an amazing episode that had pretty much nothing to do with the script, she said, please, this is the guys in Canada when it comes to the scripts. And this was the point when they realised that making a show in CGI was closer to live action than traditional cell animation, so they started approaching the scripts as if they were doing live action. So I think that's why from the end of season 1 the story started getting a little bit more better, because the scripts were a bit tighter and there was a bigger focus on action, which made the stories a bit more watchable and engaging.
Yeah.
But they still had to deal with the broadcast standards.
Oh dear.
Yeah, no, I was reading about this and the way that there was a lot of very bizarre censorship things that came in. Like, one of them was that, so there's the 2 characters, there's Dot and Enzo, and they're brother and sister. So Dot's kind of, I don't know, presumably like 10 or 15 years older than Enzo, but you know, so he's like the kid brother, she's the adult sister. And there was one point when there was like Dot gives Enzo a sisterly kiss, like a normal kiss, and the censors
on his birthday.
Yeah, on his birthday, and the censors said that this was too sexualized and would encourage incest.
Seriously? I didn't know that. What the
glitch?
I think the most ridiculous was probably bear in mind this is a Canadian show. They couldn't include a game of hockey, not because hockey's violent,
yeah, that's a
but
weird
because
one.
they weren't allowed to use the phrase hockey puck, because apparently hockey puck is a slang term meaning a mixture of feces and semen.
I don't What?
This is a made-up thing that censors made up and just decided that
Yeah,
it was a
but-
real thing. Yeah, honestly, there's a lot of weird
it wasn't.
things about that.
So basically, this wasn't. I think this was just ABC's censorship, so BSMP in America, and they had this very long list of things that they weren't allowed to do. So like they couldn't have guns or sharp weapons. Episodes couldn't end on massive cliffhangers. They couldn't have characters jumping through windows because a kid might watch ReBoot and decide, "Ooh, Bob jumped through a window. That looks fun," and then jump through a window himself.
Yeah.
And also, I think Dot, like the main female character, wasn't allowed to have two breasts. So they had to kind of conjoin them together to make what they referred to as a mono breast.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I know we've been quoting the Sonic fan dub thing, but there's a polygon breast joke in that thing, and that just came into my brain as soon as you said that.
Well, you know,
but yes,
you know, Rouge the Bat also had her breasts censored at one point as well, right?
Oh, seriously?
Okay, but
That's like a
I
whole
think the thing
thing.
with
Yeah.
the censorship is they did not take this lying down, and they included several jokes at the expense of BSMP in the show. And the most notable of these was an entire episode poking fun at their broadcast standards representative, who was in this episode and as a binome, who's the binomes in the show are basically like little cubes or spheres that represent the ones and zeros. And she was basically rejecting all the acts for Enzo's birthday party, and that was their way of taking the piss out of the broadcast standards by saying, "No, you can't do this."
This guy's the one. Yeah? Hmm?
Really, Miss Matrix? There's gonna be children in the audience. I'm afraid I can't approve of this one.
Next.
And they also had a parody of the Village People's YMCA called BSMP, which had the lyrics, "It's fun to play in a non-violent way."
'Cause we're living with BSMP. Yeah, we're living with BSMP. Oh, it's fun to play in a non-violent way.
I did notice some little nods to censorship in that episode. That was a lot of fun. But like, yeah, you can really tell like once they escaped from the censors, which I think they did. Which one was it? Was it season? Would have been season 3, I guess.
Yeah.
It was halfway through season 2 when they escaped from the censors, because basically what happened was ABC got purchased by Disney, and basically Disney cancelled like any shows that wasn't being produced in-house at ABC, and ReBoot was one of them. Apparently, I don't know how true this is, but apparently Disney, they were kind of not unhappy that some Canadians had produced the first CGI TV series and they hadn't, so they cancelled ReBoot out of spite. And because the creators of ReBoot knew they were getting cancelled, they just basically threw practically all the notes from broadcast standards out the window and just did what they wanted for like the end of season 2.
That's classic. Oh yeah. No, there's that's what I love, is that there's some really iconic stuff that happens at the end of season 2, and that's what I mean about like this series treats its audience with respect. Like there's a real feeling of like of dramatic weight to what happens from kind of like like literally that, yeah, probably from halfway through season 2 onwards. Like there's a certain point, and it's the most innocuous moment, and I think like we know what I'm talking about here, is when Hexadecimal is one of the villains. She's great, I love her, I would marry her. But Hexadecimal, she's looking in a mirror, and she's doing her usual like crazy lady, "Oh, I'm looking in my mirror, and you know, like what crazy evil things will I do today?" And then something smashes through the mirror, and you think, okay, this is going to be another normal shenanigans episode with Hexadecimal. She's caused some horrible thing to escape from her mirror, but it'll all be resolved by the end of that episode, and it isn't. It then keeps going, and the whole plot keeps going from that point on. It's literally just this midway point in season 2 that this happens, and you do just get this sense of, oh, okay, like there's a story now. You know, it's not just kind of like fun little vignette episodes where like, oh, here's Bob and he's in a race car game, and oh look, they're in a parody of Dungeons and Dragons. You know, it's like all of these different little video game kind of centered things that they were doing like for each episode. but then after that kind of took a back seat, and it became more and more about the world and what was going on in it, and what the backstories were of all the characters, because they all get developed. Yeah,
that definitely started in season 2, because I think that's when the show started playing with continuity between episodes. Like, it starts off subtly, because like in the first episode of season 2, Megabyte refers to hexadecimal as family, and there's like mentions here and there of something called a web. And I think like particularly there's 3 episodes which are Bad Bob, Painted Windows, and Andrea, which are basically based around like shuffling characters around, putting things in place. Like in Painted Windows, Mike the TV ends up with hexadecimal, which of course sets in motion the events that come later. And we also get introduced to a new character who's Andrea, who's basically 2 functions. She's friends for Enzo, and because she's a fish out of water, because she's a character who came from a game.
Yeah.
And she's an audience surrogate character. And also, we also get a big bombshell in that episode where we find out that Dot and Enzo's dad basically killed everyone before the show started.
And he hasn't got any friends because there aren't many small sprites left in Mainframe since the Twin City was destroyed. Oh, I'm sorry, Dot. I didn't mean to...
No, I'm okay. It's just that talk of the other city reminds me of my father.
It wasn't his fault, Dot. The experiment just got out of control.
I know. I just wish he were here now. I miss him.
Yeah, I would argue that, we said that, they threw out all the rules, as it were, like partway through series 2, and they subtly kind of built it up, the more kind of dark and serious storytelling in series 2. But I'd argue it's the end of series 1 where it really shows.
Oh yes, I know what you mean. With
yeah, like the final episode where basically there's that what if scenario, where basically, first of all we see the value of Dot as a character, because she's questioning her doubt, questioning her value as a character and stuff like that. But I've enjoyed this idea that one individual in fiction can have a huge sway on reality without them even realising it. There's a good novel I recommend called Matt Haig's Midnight Library, which basically explores this kind of neat sci-fi concept of what if you did this choice and this choice, this is how the world would end up, and this person will suffer as a result of it. And this basically in this what if scenario, the whole of Mainframe is thrown into a dystopia. And it's just it's frightening. It's everyone's got like barcodes on their heads and stuff like that.
Yes.
It's like
it's the world that Megabyte, the villain, would cause, presumably, or
Yeah, and he does. He does later on.
Well, this is the thing.
Which we'll get to later.
What I find funny is that you guys saying like, oh, what if like this had happened instead? I'm like, well, it doesn't matter because Megabyte does take over for a bit.
Well, yeah, but there's differences because first of all, Bob's not nullified.
That's true.
And in this reality, he's a worm, and it's done. It's over.
One thing I would say, because you brought up that episode, that was the first episode which featured Feathers McGraw from Wallace and Gromit, but that was the only episode he was supposed to appear in, because basically the scene he appears in was a homage to The Wrong Trousers. But what would happen was the animators would be like building their scenes, and they'd be going through all the models in the archive. They'd find this penguin, and they'd think, oh, I'm going to put the penguin in the background of my scene. And then the director would see it and think, oh, that's funny, let's leave it in. And then Gavin and Ian would see the finished episodes and be like, what's the penguin doing in the episode? And they'd get really annoyed because they were worried that Aardman were going to get pissed off with them, saying, you are using our characters, please stop using our characters. And I think after the like 4th time or something he appeared, I think Ian, I'll be trying to avoid swearing, but Ian, I think he shouted something like, I want the fucking penguin deleted. And then the penguin was deleted from the archives and never seen again.
We all know that Feathers McGraw is the real villain of this show.
It's true. It is true.
But one thing I do like is that when he does appear in the last episode of Series 1, the same sort of music that is played in Wallace and Gromit, like his little kind of evil theme tune. It's kind of like a sort of slightly altered version, so they can avoid a copyright, but it does play out. So I thought.
There's a lot of that in the music, because there's an episode where there's a whole homage to the Thunderbirds, and there's kind of the music plays is kind of like similar to the Thunderbirds theme, but not to the extent that they're going to get sued.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very playful score. I really like what they do with the music. You've got hexadecimal's like little motif that plays.
Oh yeah, it's so creepy.
Yeah, there's like all of these like great little touches where you go, okay, this is this is about to happen. I love the pirates theme. There's like a binome
Yes.
pirate ship appears. The Crimson, was it the Crimson Binome?
The Crimson Binome, yes.
Yeah.
What's their deal?
They're just pirates sailing around the world, but they got a
but
fun little
wait.
theme tune.
Yeah, they do, but they're like interdimensional pirates though. Almost, they're going across the webs, like selling like.
They're looting and plundering. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how they started. Then they go into legitimate business with dots.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, what does he say? Oh yeah, he says, "Shiver me templates." And literally every time I'm drawing one of our thumbnails, I start saying that.
The Crimson Binome is a fun moment where I won't say what happens, but they're like one of those throwaway episodes in one of the early seasons that then becomes a big deal in the later seasons, which is really fun. So there's little touches like that, which is great. As you said, Rob, there's a lot going on like that.
Yeah, I think before we kind of go into like kind of more of the story, I think we need to talk about some of the characters because we're kind of throwing out character names, but not really talking about these characters. But I think I want to talk about, like, I've got 3 or 4 favourite characters, which just shows how much I love this show. But like, I'd say they're mostly the main characters. But yeah, Bob is like, he's the main character, but what's great about him is he's not your typical stoic hero you typically get in these kind of shows. He's like goofy and unprepared, which makes sense because later on we find out he came to Mainframe as a cadet, so he's out of his element and a bit over his head. And he's like goofy and like he doesn't take things too seriously, but when things are needed, when the situation requires it, he's able to get serious. And he has a no-kill rule, which is different from other Guardians who wish to kill viruses on sight. It's something that's not really explored until later on, and it's touched upon, but sadly not explored fully.
He's a bit like Saban.
Yeah, so with what's interesting with the kind of the Guardians is that they're basically like every character is kind of like some kind of program. Like they mentioned that Dot is command.com, so that could have an idea that they all have some kind of programming in them, and Guardians are kind of like antiviral software, and then you have Megabyte and Hexadecimal who are viruses, and their whole purpose is to corrupt and ruin everything, ruin your computer, as it were. But then you have these Guardians who are the the antiviral kind of programs who jump in and as you mentioned, Rob, like he's supposed to delete the viruses when he can, but he has this kind of code of ethics about like, I'm gonna change it. But what I like about Bob, as you said, he's kind of out of his depth and he doesn't know what he's doing. But what I find really fun is that you've got the little kid character Enzo, who obviously sees Bob as a hero and like the coolest guy ever. So he doesn't quite realize that Bob literally has no idea what he's doing. And so I think that's really cute that like everything we kind of see is from the audience perspective, who's like a 10-year-old boy. And I just think that's a really clever idea, because then later on in the season, as you mentioned, Rob, we see Enzo's kind of perspective on Bob change a bit as he kind of starts to realize that Bob doesn't really know what he's doing most of the time.
Yeah, so Enzo, at the start, like, he's basically just a surrogate kid character for the target audience to relate to. I think the showrunners didn't even want to include him, but the show's producer were like, you've got to have a kid in the show for the audience to relate to. And they even said, you've got to have a little Enzo running around, and that's where that name came from. Yeah. And like, I think at the end of season 2, he ends up becoming a Guardian.
Enzo Matrix, there is a huge responsibility in taking the Guardian badge of office. Do you accept?
Yes, sir.
By the power vested in me, I give you a field commission as Guardian. First level. No, Enzo, you've really earned this. You will be transferred to the supercomputer to attend the academy and become a full-fledged Guardian like me. I know you'll make me proud.
Bob, we're at the tour. Megabyte, Mouse, Hexadecimal, and I are ready to go. I can't believe I just said that.
Okay, let's do it. Guardian Enzo?
Yes, sir?
This is it. Should anything happen to me, I am charging you with defense of this system.
And in season 3, he ends up becoming the most developed character in the entire show, which we'll get into later. Like I said earlier when I was talking about my discovery of the show, he ages up like partway into season 3.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's a whole, like, we don't want to go into too much, but there's a whole story going on there where, like I said, he grows up and he kind of realizes that a lot of the kind of the Saturday morning kids cartoon stuff was very much the world that Bob was in his element in. But when more serious stuff starts happening, you know, where it is like, okay, the no-kill rule, that needs to be out the window because we're dealing with serious threats now, and Bob just doesn't quite know how to deal with that, whereas Enzo does, because he's kind of got used to this kind of more you know, kind of dangerous world that the story kind of gets into. You know, it's like when you see my two favorite characters are Hack and Slash, and Hack and Slash are the bumbling Laurel and Hardys of the reboot world, where they're kind of constantly like bickering with each other. They're like an old married couple. You know, they're like, and they're the main, they're the two henchmen of the villain of Megabyte. But they're clearly Saturday morning cartoon. But they're the Saturday morning cartoon villains. You know, they're like, oh, you know, we're these doofy characters. Whoa, we're goofy and silly, and you know, we're like, oh, we're always making mistakes. Oh, you know, and it's like, but then you put these two lovable kind of villain characters in these horrific storylines in seasons 3 and 4, and you just want to grab them and hug the two because they're that's really sad.
Their best moment was in season 3 where the Big White makes them execute this guy, and Hack's like, no, we need to do this, and Slash is like, no, we can't do this, it's bad. And in the end, Slash is like, I miss Bob because whenever we try to do something really bad, Bob always stopped us, but now Bob's not around, so no one's here to stop us.
Cannot do this. It is bad.
What do you think you're doing?
I am saving the little fellow from what to me looks like certain death.
Yeah, that's right. And we're supposed to be that certain death.
Go, little fellow. Run. Be free.
Now you've done it. Megabyte's gonna be mad.
Oh, what's new? I miss Bob.
What? You crazy?
Bob always stopped us before we could do anything really bad. Now nobody does.
They're a bit like the Badniks from a Sonic game. They're just kind of like these incompetently lovable fools, which is great.
Yeah.
Also, I want to talk about Dot because I think Dot is a representative of all the female characters in the show, where they're all fantastic. But I think Dot, they could have made her the damsel character that Bob has to rescue every episode, but they didn't go that route. Like, Dot is Bob's equal; she's just as capable as Bob is, and sometimes she's even the one to save the day instead of Bob. And I make the argument that the show,
like I said, she's the one who actually knows what she's doing.
Yeah, and I'd argue that the show would be just as good if Dot was the main character instead of Bob. Like by season 3, she's in charge of Mainframe's defense and is the commander of the system. And like James said earlier, she's capable, but she's quick to blame herself when things go wrong. She can get wrapped up in her guilt somewhat.
Well, there was a comment. I watched the behind the scenes, the making of ReBoot. There was a really interesting comment. One of the people, because they were asking them the developers, who's your favorite character, and one of them said, oh, Dot, she's kind of like she's like a woman of the woman of the 90s, I think they said. And that was really interesting because she has that hairstyle, that kind of 90s hairstyle that women wore, and it was that kind of idea of this woman who, she's having to look after her kid brother. She's also having to have a job at her diner. And then she's also eventually, fighting bad guys and fighting, and there's all of these things that women, I suppose they're still expected of it now, but definitely in the 90s there was this kind of new idea of the every woman was like, oh, the woman who has it all, I guess is what I'm saying. And Dot is kind of like the perfect personification of that, which is quite cool to see. In a kids CG cartoon, you don't really see that, but it's great.
Yeah, because there's also like Mouse, who comes in later on, who's kind of like a shady mercenary kind of character, but with a heart of gold, and she's really cool. She has a katana and everything, and she's kind of
Mouse is not. She's not actually a mouse. Just saying that. But we'll put out that.
Yeah, but I think she's cool. She's kind of our first introduction to the kind of the kind of slightly shady side of the ReBoot world when she first introduced. There's also Andrea comes on later on, and she's basically Enzo's equal in the same way that Dot's Bob's equal. And of course there's Hexadecimal, the Queen of Chaos, who our dog is more powerful than Megabyte. And if she wanted to, she could have control over Mainframe. But she doesn't want that. She just wants to cause random chaos.
Yeah. Well, that's what I like about Hexadecimal, is that she's just a big kid, and she, like, you know, even when she's at her most evil, there's always this sense of her, like, she's just doing it for fun, and she's just enjoying it. And it's like with the Medusa episode I mentioned, that was Hexadecimal who, like, froze everyone. And there's a certain point at the very end when she realizes she's literally frozen the whole world, and she's like, "Oh no, this is boring." She just like reverses it instantly. She's like, "No," you know.
Can I be honest?
And that's her whole character.
Her best episode was when she basically hacked into Mainframe's paint program and just paints the whole city.
Yeah, MS Paint.
It's basically doing what Megabyte wanted to do a few episodes beforehand and recreate the whole city in her image. But she's not doing it because she wants to control. She just wants to have fun. And she's doing a grand gesture of expressing herself.
Picture, if you will, an artist of great talent, unappreciated by those around her, unnoticed by the critics. What would this artist have to do? What kind of masterpiece would she have to create to get recognition from those around her?
Yeah, but
that's my favourite episode, I think.
That episode, first of all, Hexadecimal is... I know you guys say you love her and all that, but she's genuinely scary. I think
she's very scary. Yeah.
She is very scary. Like her 3D animation. Do you know the doll out of Five Nights at Freddy's? Like Five Nights at Freddy's 2, I think it is.
Oh, the marionette.
That one. Yeah. She kind of reminds me of that. And...
Well, it's the way that her face is always... She has all these masks, and she changes the mask, and it's like, you know, like those theatre drama masks. You know, the happy face and the sad face, and like she's always changing these expressions, but her face never moves. You know,
pure jump scare material. But that episode you mentioned with the paintings, this kind of sprung to mind when I was watching it, and I sent you guys a clip of it. Army Men 2 is a game which I think it came out on the PlayStation 1. That has these really disturbing game over scenes, and the way the characters get turned into paintings in that episode, I don't know why, but it just kind of reminded me of the horrific deaths that occur in that same sort of animation style as the Iron Man 2 deaths. You can watch them on YouTube. And I think also just the fact that she's presented in this animation style makes it even more kind of scary.
She's creepy.
Yeah,
she's a really creepy character, but that's what I love about her, is that she is scary, but she's also kind of lovable. There's a lot going on with Hex.
I want to talk about Megabyte, because Megabyte is probably just my favourite villain in all of fiction. Like, he's got this really cool design, and he's got the perfect evil villain voice from Tony J, who we spoke about in our Fallout episode. He just revels in being evil and takes pleasure in it. In season 1, he's like, he doesn't get his hands dirty. He's more like a mob boss. He basically just resorts to his incompetent underlings to do his dirty work. And I think by season 2, he's had enough of that, and he takes matters into his own hands more. And it's like he becomes a genuine threat, and the results are much more devastating.
Another thing about Megabyte is that I was just mentioning Iron Man 2. Another thing that ReBoot and Megabyte as well reminds me of is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Gex games on PS1.
I know of them.
Gex the Lizard. Yeah, so Megabyte kind of reminds me of Rez from those games. Like this giant robotic kind of lizard monster that he's kind of trying to hack people's TVs and stuff and cause mayhem in the alternate dimension and stuff like that. And also the animation of ReBoot kind of reminds me of Pandemonium. Like the villains remind me of like characters from Pandemonium games. So they're both Pandemonium and Gex are both made by the same creator. So I don't know why, but Megabyte, I love how he's styled as this kind of mechanical beast. He's very menacing, you know. But yeah, I love his style.
The thing, that his design, he's kind of like the character we mentioned in Fallout, where he's like this big burly guy. But then it's really surprising that he has this, you know, kind of elegant Shakespearean voice, you know, you know, the wonderful Tony J had. And you just think, wow, they hit it off with like getting him, and it was the fact that he came back over, and I was always kind of wondering that, is there going to be a moment when like Tony J's too busy, or like there's a moment, or like I'm not going to do a kids cartoon anymore, sort of thing. But it's like no, he always came back right up until season 4. It's so great, like every time.
Yeah, he loved the show. The show would always have like really long hiatuses between seasons, and he was always getting back touch with them, saying, "When do I get Still Megabyte?" Again, and he's saying stuff like, you need to do more ReBoot, because this you really should do more. It's a fun little show." And he used to smoke cigarettes while recording his lines.
That explains the gravelly voice. Yeah. I just want to mention speaking of like people, like adult fans, I think the most amazing one, it has to be Gillian Anderson of X-Files fame. Like, to the point that she has a cameo in this as her character in X-Files, which is just fantastic. She turns up and it's like, that's Gillian Anderson. Her voice is so recognizable. But yeah, she was a big fan of the show, because who was she? She was dating, or she was married to someone at the time who was involved with Mainframe.
She was dating someone who worked at Mainframe, yeah. And then they invited her on a tour of Mainframe, and she went around like signing all the posters of like, because there were X-Files posters dotted around, and she would like sign them. And I think one of the animators asked for a photo with her, and she just sat on his lap to take the picture. And then while she was there, they asked her, would you like to appear in the show? And she was more than up for it. And I think there's even pictures out there of her wearing ReBoot hats.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so she was a big fan, which is great. And yeah, that episode where, because like I said, a lot of the kind of stuff, a lot of the episodes are kind of referencing various things. Like, there's a Mad Max episode, but there's also but there's of course this X-Files episode, which is really well done. It's a really nice, like it's done as a kind of an X-Files style, like kind of murder mystery story.
It is structured like your typical X-Files episode, where it's basically even got like kind of like a cold opening where the monster attacks someone, and then we cut to the main characters, which is pretty much how an X-Files episode is structured.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But yeah, I know, Rob, you'll be keen to discuss Bad Bob, the Mad Max episode, because again, there's an interesting thing going on there with the behind the scenes, I think, isn't it?
Basically, how that episode came about, Bad Bob, which is the Mad Max episode, it came about because the show's production designer, Brendan McCarthy, he randomly drew a picture of Megabyte as a truck, because he thought it was cool, and he gave it to the showrunners, and they're like, "What is this?" He's like, "It's Megabyte as a truck. It's cool, isn't it?" Yeah, like, yeah, but what's this for? He's like, "I don't know. I just thought it was cool." And then they made a whole episode around that. So basically, the whole episode is it's what they did well with the references is the references were just the backdrop to the fantastic storytelling. So basically, it's a new kind of game, because it's basically, Bob doesn't just simply got to stop the user, he's got to keep the game going, because Mainframe's energy trapped in the game, and if the game ends too early before he's able to get the energy back, the whole city's dead, basically.
Megabyte has succeeded in stealing the core energy, which is now trapped in the game with us.
Oh, great! That means if the user wins, we're doomed. And if I win, we're doomed. Mainframe's energy will leave with the game.
Precisely. You must keep the game going until we can get the energy back to the principal office.
So it's a different kind of episode. What Brendan McCarthy did was he took a tape of that episode and sent it to the Mad Max creator George Miller, and then the two worked together on Mad Max Fury Road. So basically this one episode of ReBoot led to Mad Max Fury Road, but it was also the episode which had one of the bigger fights with broadcast standards, as they took all the things they weren't allowed to do and put them in the episode. And then they got a note back saying, "Show completely rejected." But then they phoned up. I think Ian phoned them up after and said, "But we made this episode just for you. All the things you told us not to do, we put in an episode as an example of what not to do."
Just very quickly, I just said a Megabyte vehicle in that episode looks a bit like the Magog cartel train on World Exodus. Do you remember the?
Oh yeah, I see that.
Yeah, the kind of skull train. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Mad Max Fury Road, I thought it looked like the war rig from that film. It's like uncanny how similar it looks. So the fact that the writer was actually involved, or was it the production designer?
Production designer, yeah.
Yeah, that like honestly, that he probably took that megabyte truck and took it all the way 20 years later into Mad Max Fury Road. It's fantastic. Like, it's just a great realization that it all started off from this, this little CG cartoon way back when. But yeah, no, it's great.
But yeah, as we were saying earlier, season 2 is where the story started picking up, I think, and where that really started was where the show reaches peak, which is like I said, the start of season 2 is kind of like putting things in place, and then the last 4 episodes, this big 4-part story. And it's like we get this kind of creature that comes from this place called the Web, and it's different from anything we've seen in the show before. It's kind of got more organic, and it's like in Alien, we don't know what it is, so it freaks us out.
Yeah.
And then like it's kind of in the background at the start. It's like basically just infecting Megabyte and Hexadecimal, basically, and then it ends with this massive war where Bob has to team up with Megabyte to get rid of this portal from the Web that's causing all this havoc. And you think, oh, Bob's gonna save the day, and he doesn't. Megabyte.
Okay,
he shoots him into
Here
the web.
we go, guys. Oh, okay. I'm gonna say, guys, this is the spoiler moment. Spoilers, everyone, because I guess we want to discuss the main plot.
Yeah. I feel like we spoiled a lot already, but yeah.
I feel like we've been very good up until. I think the big twist is
the ending of series 1 though.
That's fine. Like season 1 is fine. That's fair game. No, I think the big spoiler point is when Bob loses at the end of season 2 and gets shot out into the web and is essentially exiled, and Megabyte wins. You know, it's an amazing twist.
Megabyte! You won't get away with this! No time to talk now, Bob. Launch.
One more step, and I'll subdivide you. What?
The only person standing in his way is Enzo, who had literally been made a Guardian, like, at the start of that episode. He's not ready for this. And that's a big part of season 3. Like, they don't bring Bob back in the first episode of season 3. It's Enzo trying to be the Guardian he needs to be. But, like, Megabyte is trying to turn everyone against him with a propaganda campaign. And, like, the only reason Enzo is even alive is because Megabyte is allowing him to live.
That's a great moment when, Megabyte grabbed, and this is again very clearly they've escaped the censors at this point, because Megabyte grabs Enzo, who's like he's a 10-year-old kid, literally chokes him like with his hand, and he tells him the only reason you're surviving this encounter is because I've decided you will. There's very clearly, I'm going to kill you if you become anything more annoying than what you are currently. It's a great moment,
I am a Guardian! I'm not your messenger!
You are what you have always been, a mere delivery boy. Do not provoke me further. It is by my will alone you survive this encounter. Be well advised to remember that.
I think the first episode of this season perfectly shows that they've escaped the censors, because they homage Evil Dead. Like the first, it is brilliant. It's like, and it's like I get like a user who's basically Ash Williams from Evil Dead completes the catchphrase groovy, and it's like there's even like visual throwbacks to the Evil Dead. But it's like I think it's perfect because it shows how unprepared Enzo is, because he's used to having Bob in the games with him, but in the first game alone, it's this really sinister, scary game, and Frisky the dog gets shot. It kind of shows no one's safe now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Well,
fourth
that's-
wall gets broken as well. Like when the characters call the game, like they say, like, what kind of sick creature plays games for pleasure? And they literally look at the camera, like really judgmentally at the viewer, as if like,
why would they play such violent games? Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, what I like about the games is that it does give them a license to do all of their various references, because they obviously love doing them. Like at a later point in one of these episodes, like where Enzo's leading, they have an entire James Bond opening sequence.
Yes, I'm going to get to the games later, but yeah, I think one thing that really sets the tone for this arc is Bob's not narrating the intro anymore. It's Megabyte, and that shows he's the one who's effectively in control.
My format: virus, to corrupt and conquer.
But I feel the games in season 3, they perfectly parallel what the characters are going through in that episode. Like when Megabyte puts his propaganda against Enzo into effect, the first game is a Looney Tunes game where Enzo turns into Elmer Fudd, who's the ineffectual buffoon who can never get Bugs Bunny, and this reflects how he's been portrayed by the propaganda campaign and how Enzo's feeling about himself. Then the next episode he's feeling a bit more confident and he's James Bond.
Yeah. Well, that's like I said, there's all these wonderful film references, and yeah, you're right. They did use the way that Enzo is kind of becoming more confident, and I think that ultimately ties into the big kind of dramatic one where they're in the fighting game, like Mortal Kombat.
Oh yeah, before we get to that, I want to talk about Firewall because it's my favourite episode of this show. It's like Ewan said, like they eschew the traditional opening credit sequence and instead get like a James Bond pre-type sequence, and this one's actually a homage to a particular James Bond film, as it's basically the opening sequence to The Spy Who Loved Me, but instead of James Bond, it's Santa being chased by snowmen, and then that's followed up by a full-on James Bond song. And then this is where they're basically trying to contain Megabyte in the firewall to stop him causing havoc. And this is when Megabyte, I think, at this point, he's had enough playing around. He's got Hexadecimal in a shock collar. He controls her powers. He's going to start putting things into effect. He's going to get rid of Enzo. And at the end, Megabyte is ready to kill Enzo. And he's basically ready to just watch Enzo's final humiliation when the firewall fails and then kill him.
You're sick, Megabyte. I won't rest until I've stopped you.
I believe that's an idle threat. It ends now.
But he then ends up trapped in the firewall through his own arrogance. And another thing I liked was a little side character gets developed, Cyrus. He's the one who's basically been forced to do all the propaganda against Enzo. He ends up in a game with Enzo, and he ends up working together with Enzo. And after that, he saves his life. It's a shame they didn't do more with Cyrus, because I believe he was going to be in the last arc. But I think because of time constraints, they cut that part of the story.
There's already a lot going on in the story. It's probably a bit difficult to do. Yeah. One thing I wanted to say actually is, while we're talking about the story and stuff like that, see, like the beginning of series 3, the animation is just so much better. Like it's just actually unbelievable how much like detail there is.
Yeah.
Like there's clear details and shadows over the characters. The movements have so much more expression. The colour detail is just beautiful to look at. It's just, it's great.
Season 3 holds up well today, I feel, for the most part. They were actually capable of rendering in HD. They didn't, obviously, because it took too long to render and no one was broadcasting in HD in 1997. So yeah, that idea was thrown out the window.
Do we want to jump ahead into when the big kind of plot development occurs with Enzo as well?
Oh, when Enzo loses?
Yes, at the moment where Enzo gets a slit across his eye and becomes the Scar reincarnate is just when the show goes all cards off, and we're going to tell an epic story now, and that's the story of Matrix.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, So after the first, basically season 3 is structured in 16 episodes, broken up into 4 episode arcs that all combine to tell one big story. It's really well done, and really well structured. Like, the first 3 arcs all tie into the last arc. Like, the last arc is the culmination of everything. But yeah, the second arc follows, like, Enzo and Andrea as they've grown up, travelling from different systems via the games to return them to Mainframe.
I live in the games. I search through systems, peoples, and cities for this place. Mainframe. My home.
Enzo is now like a bath-frizzled, PTSD-ridden badass who hates viruses, and he will happily kill them without mercy or hesitation.
There's no Guardian here. I'm Matrix, the Renegade.
Please, Renegade, mercy.
Mercy? To a virus? Never.
Yeah. It takes on like a Clint Eastwood-esque kind of multiversal journey where Matrix and Andrea just kind of traverse and save broken worlds almost. You know, they're helping the how Clint Eastwood just travels to place helping the little guy. Oh, Mad Max as well, actually.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that kind of Western.
And that first episode when we meet Matrix, they did something really clever. They introduced this character called Backup, who's like a little kid, who's similar to how Enzo was as a child. It shows the extreme contrast and juxtaposition between young Enzo and Matrix. Because young Enzo, Backup, idolises Matrix in the way Enzo idolised Bob.
Hey, Matrix? Where are you going?
This is your family now. I'm going to find mine. This game might be my only chance to get home. Hey, Backup. Catch.
Alphanumeric! Thanks!
Game over.
Did that kid remind you of anybody?
Not particularly.
Didn't think so.
Well, that's what I like, is that there's an element of never meet your heroes. Because obviously one of the big things is that Enzo is desperate to find Bob, who's been lost in the web all this time. And it is, this feeling of, oh wait, I'm actually more capable than Bob ever was. You know, like there's this feeling of like a genuine frustration. Like when Enzo does finally find Bob after all this time, there's this genuine frustration from him when he realizes, actually, you're not the hero that I thought you were when I was 10 years old, you know? Like, and it's like, yeah, because you saw him as this awesome hero who always saved the day. But it's like, no, Bob was just this kind of idiot goofball who just kind of happened to, like the amount of times in the early seasons where, like, Bob, you know, he manages to save the day from pure luck. Like, that's what's great about Enzo's kind of character arc, is this realization that actually, you know, I shouldn't just rely on Bob. There is this feeling of like I'm actually I'm my own guy. I'm not in Bob's shadow, you know. And I think that's a really amazing. It's an amazing story for like a like what started as very simple Saturday morning kids cartoon. It's absolutely brilliant.
And they could do something really clever with that as well, because they have a whole episode that deconstructs Enzo's characters. So basically, Matrix and Andrea end up in a game that is basically Mainframe, as it was in season 1 with Bob and Dot. And they try rebooting to see what happens, and they end up as Megabyte and Hexadecimal. And this is how we see Matrix sees his younger self as weak and ineffective, because obviously he lost the game, he couldn't beat Megabyte, so he feels he's can't become this way, the way he is now, you know, to survive in the games. So he's ready to take on Megabyte when he returns home. But there's that part of him that's afraid he's become just as bad as Megabyte.
But how? You're me.
But you hate me. You must. Look at what you've become.
You're wrong. I had to become bigger, tougher. I had to be ready for Megabyte to survive the games.
Did you like the games more than Mainframe? More than your family?
No, I didn't. I was trapped in the games.
Games. It was only a game. You killed my family!
My family!
You've forgotten your family! You let yourself become a prisoner of the games. What would Bob think of you now?
And that when he was reunited with his friends and family, they won't like what he's become. Like, because he shows up and says, "Oh, I'm Enzo," and Dot's like, "No, you're not Enzo. Enzo would never be like this." And it's also a great episode because it's a homage to The Prisoner, which is a 1967 series from Britain. Probably the most obscure reference the show ever did.
Yeah, well, they even have the opening sequence of him in the race car. It's like literally the most blatant reference, and at the end he gets eaten by, was it Rover the ball or Rover?
The Rover, the little...
Yeah, the weird golf ball monster thing that would eat people. Yeah. The Prisoner is a very weird show. We should review that at some point.
I actually have been meaning to watch that show because The Simpsons parodied it at one point.
They
as
did,
well,
yes.
Yeah,
I have it on DVD. I've watched a fair few episodes, and it's really weird. I remember when I first watched the first episode when I was 11, and I was like, "Oh, that's what that reboot episode was doing."
Yeah. It's some of the 60s at its best. The weird psychedelic stuff. No, I think you have this amazing story with Matrix as opposed to Enzo, it becomes this big epic adventure where everything before had been we're doing the same old, we're always on Mainframe, we're always in this nice little city. Here it's this big adventure where they're being chased after by police and the bad guys and
the episode of
and they run into the pirate ship,
Yeah, that's where the Guardians come back in, and they come back and they turns out they're now evil, and they've been infected by this virus, which is planting the seeds for a story that comes back later on in the next season. But it's a way to push the story into motion, because the next part of the story is Matrix and Andrea then end up going into the web to find Bob, because that's their only way back into Mainframe.
Yeah.
And that episode's really cool, the episode that introduces that, because they've got it's kind of got a Western vibe to it. They're in a really cool system. They've got a whole Western shootout at the end, which is Andrea's finest moment. And if you want to watch one on out of context moment from the show, I'd say look up the Andrea Guardian showdown. It's so cool.
What took you so long?
I came as fast as I could.
And my men?
Don't ask. He was wondering if your drone has a personality chip. Don't tell me. I'm under arrest.
You wish.
I think the big controversy, I guess, is that the story essentially ends with season 3, really. The actual plot of, saving Bob, Enzo and Andrea.
Not in the UK.
Okay, well, why not in the UK?
Because we stopped after the episode Return of the Crimson Bynum, which is the episode that they enter the web to rescue Bob. So rather than for some reason CITV, they didn't buy the whole of season 3. They only bought the first 10 episodes or so, which is funny enough. We got the first 6 episodes before Canada did. So the first 6 episodes of season 3 actually premiered in the UK, and then it vanished for 6 months, and then came back with repeats. And I think we're the only country that got complaints about the first episodes. Because the Evil Dead episode got 19 complaints from parents. Yeah, because of I think this is post. I think we just entered Tony Blair Britain, so we're past the Thatcher years and John Major years. But I think we're still feeling the artifacts of the whole Mary Whitehouse Brigade.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
They were still around in those days.
Although apparently, the violence was nothing to do with why the show stopped. They stopped it 9 episodes in because of low ratings, and because I think some ReBoot fans wrote letters asking them to get the rest of the series, and they said, no, we'll buy the rest if the ratings improve, but because the ratings have dropped, we're cautious about buying more episodes.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a shame. Yeah, that's crazy to me that you wouldn't just buy the whole season as one big like thing, just so you can at least finish the story. Like, it's amazing to me that you like this was before like internet was like accessible to everyone. So like that's really harsh for like people to just not like the story's just over now, kids. I'm sorry, it's done now. And you go, oh, okay. So we get to the Crimson Biome. They're about to get back home. Nope. Bye.
That's mean.
That's really mean,
but like you were saying, a lot of people consider season 3 to be like the ending. I kind of in that camp, but also I love the Damon stuff. What they do with that when we'll go to season 4.
I really like season 4, but it is a bit like the second half of season 2 of Twin Peaks, where it's like the story's over now, but we're still going.
I think I like the
I'll go on season 4 later, but I want to talk about the end of season 3. So basically, they return to Mainframe, and it's in ruin. Megabyte's in control in their absence. And what's cool is when we get back, we see flashbacks of what happened while Matrix and Andrea were away. So they return with Bob, and they explore the city, and they see like, oh, Megabyte and Hexadecimal escaped the firewall. Like Megabyte then took over the principal office, and he's got Fong's head in the jar, and then Matrix basically has this big final battle with Megabyte, which is really awesome. It's like, because we've been building up to that since the moment where Megabyte choked Enzo, and now Matrix is finally getting his comeuppance. Like
a score to settle,
because when Megabyte first sees Matrix, he underestimates him. He sees, oh, it's that boy, he's back, and he's like taunting him, and he's like, oh, throw your gun away, fight me like a real sprite. And he's kind of like, right up until Enzo punches him, he's all like, he's really smug. Then Enzo punches him, leaves a dent in his chest, and then Megabyte looks down, he's like, oh, glitch! What have I got myself into? And then we have this big fight, and it's really awesome. And Matrix chooses to spare Megabyte, because all through this, when we've introduced the Matrix, he kills a virus. It's a mercy to a virus, never. But here he decides to just let Megabyte live the humiliation of his defeats.
You can't do this. It goes against everything you stand for.
You took away my life, destroyed my home, caused nothing but pain and suffering to everyone I held dear. Surprised? Don't be. You're not worth it. Mainframe will always endure. Remember this defeat, this humiliation. Remember you can never win.
When Megabyte leaves, the system just completely crashes, and then all the users from previous episodes come back, which I think was perfect because it allowed Matrix to beat up his demons, because the user that bested him back in like the episode Game Over took the form of a demon, which is a bit of a weird choice. But then when you get to this episode, it makes sense because it's like a physical manifestation of Matrix's demons, and he's putting them to rest, basically.
One thing I wanted to mention is that there is a very there's an emotional moment between Matrix and Dot. So they obviously, Dot finally sees like her little brother grow up into who he is now, and they have not seen each other for, I want to say, many years at this point. And
for Matrix, it's been many. I'll say for Matrix, it's been many years. For DOS, it hasn't been that long, because basically time in the games is accelerated. So Matrix has aged quicker than relative to time as everyone else.
Yeah, but also it's really awkward because Bob's obviously Glitch Bob's with them, and Dot and Bob reunite is just like the most awkward thing ever, because Mouse just snogs Bob and Dot's just
Bob's a bit of a player.
Well, they always have a bit of a will they won't they with Bob and Dot, and
and that's why
it's never really resolved.
No, because that's why they kiss at the end of season 3, because they thought after season 3 we're done. They said, I think Gavin Blair himself said, we would never let Bob and Dot kiss if we knew we were getting a season 4.
Right, yeah, and I think that's the thing. But then, I think it ends so brilliantly. You have the little recap with the Modern Major General song.
Oh yes.
Even little Enzo
comes back.
The story ended.
Dreamed of this each lonely night of doing in that virus trash, but just as I had won the fight, he engineered a system crash. Dreamed of this each lonely night of doing in that virus trash, but just as you had won the fight, he engineered a system crash.
Yeah, there's all this, like, goofy stuff going on, and I'm like, this is great. Let's just, I like Season 4. I think it's really cool what they do, but, like, obviously, the big controversy, I'm going to say this, of Season 4 is that it ends on a cliffhanger.
Okay.
Season 3 did not end on a cliffhanger.
I'm going to explain all this.
That's the difference.
Okay, so how Season 4 came about was Season 3 aired in Canada in 1997. It didn't get picked up in the US until 1999 when Cartoon Network aired it on Toonami. And I think it aired, just before Dragon Ball Z, which was like one of the biggest shows at the time, because I think Pokemon had just taken off and like anime was starting to really kick off in like Western cultures. So Dragon Ball Z was one of the flagship shows there.
Dragon, come,
That was probably worked in ReBoot's favour because Cartoon Network then got in touch with Mainframe saying they wanted more reboots. And like what they were going to do was they were going to give the show like a really big high profile daily time slot in prime time. So seasons 1 to 3 would be repeated 6 days a week, and Friday night prime time they'd premiere a brand new episode of season 4. And like they'd back this up with a massive tour line because of course this is a big deal, so people like Toys R Us and Walmart were interested. What they were going to do was they were going to have 13 extra length episodes. 12 of these would be broken up into 3-4 episode arcs, because in Canada they wanted TV movies, and then the 13th was going to be a full-on musical episode. What they were going to do was like, because they wanted to write the episodes as long as they could be, and then they'd be cut down to the standard episode length for TV, then all the extra scenes would be on the DVD. But then what happened was Warner Brothers got involved, who are Cartoon Network's parent company. They weren't happy that Cartoon Network were planning to give so much airtime to a show that they didn't actually own. So then this caused a big domino effect. So the primetime, like, repeating of early episodes was cancelled. I think they repeated the show, but only once. Like, Friday night primetime season 4 premiere was gone. Toy numbers cut back massively because toy retailers lost interest. And the 13th extra length episodes got cut back to 8 standard length episodes, so they had to cram in, for those first 2 stories, as much of the story as they could. And then one of the things that ended up getting cut was the ending to the second story, because originally they were going to resolve that cliffhanger, but leave things open for the next story. It was between a rock and a hard place. Is basically we either just tell the story naturally and end it on a cliffhanger, and there's a chance we get to do season 5 because we never thought we'd even get to do season 4 to begin with, or we just cram everything in and make the episode an unsatisfying mess. And they chose the former because they thought, well, it's better. It'd be better to make a good episode of a cliffhanger than just cram everything in and make a bad episode.
I'm actually happy with how it ended. It's fun. Because it's controversial. People will be whining about it until the end of time. It's great.
I don't know. It's people seem kind of torn between whether or not it should continue or if it should have ended at Series V. Personally, I think it should have ended 4 episodes into Series 4. I think because
with Damon's story.
Yeah, like even though the ending of Series 3 was really good, and obviously as you mentioned, there's all these cameos, all these characters, and they're all kind of doing a little sing-song, and it's all lovely and happy-dappy. There are still plot threads that are dangling that hadn't been addressed. Whereas by the midpoint of Series 4, at this point, the Damon storyline is addressed. Hectodecimal has been defeated.
She's not been defeated. She sacrificed herself to save Bob.
Yeah. But what I mean is not defeated. Maybe that's not the right way. What I mean is she's been addressed as a character. She's finished now. She's gone, and Megabyte is gone. Everyone is kind of happy. It's a resolution that kind of just addresses everything, and I was really satisfied by that. And I thought that's not many shows do an ending which kind of addresses every plot thread. There's a lot of plots and like different characters and stuff going on in ReBoot. And they do address them perfectly by the midpoint of Series 4. And then, of course, a second Bob just shows up magically, like, hey, guys! And then it just suddenly just like, oh, great, now there's a whole other story that we need to sort out. That's probably going to take another fight, but
Yeah, that second story is a bit messier because I think that was probably one that suffered more from a lot of the cuts that had to be made to the story. Because I think, Doc, get what they were going for with Doc, but she comes off as kind of shallow. It's like, oh, this Bob looks like Bob, but this one doesn't look like Bob.
Yeah, I thought that as well. I thought, what? That's like, that what? That's not how it works.
Yeah. Doc clearly has PTSD because I think it's a lot based around like Bob, for the Bob they found in the web initially. He basically reminds her of like everything that's happened, like all the horrible stuff, whereas the original, or quote unquote original Bob, because he's not really the original Bob, it's actually Megabyte, reminds her of like the happy times, which I kind of get, but it comes across as a bit shallow. But if they delved into that a bit more, I get what they're going for, but wish it had the time to be fleshed out as it should be.
For sure. One of the things I really liked about Series 4, especially the early part, is that it basically explains what the web actually is, and it's almost like an artificial multiverse. This whole idea that there's other systems out there. It's kind of like almost a sort of like fictional version of them trying to explain away string theory or something like that. They're just saying like, oh my god, there's other universes out there and stuff like that. And I just thought, okay, first of all, for a kids show at this point, and also for just a general bit of sci-fi fiction at this point as well, I thought that was way ahead of its time and quite a high concept. Just this idea of a artificial, minuscule multiverse that's in the form of the internet. I thought that was really neat and clever.
Now, I know I have my critics that some sprites say there are no other systems, but just stop a cycle and process that statement. Can you really believe we are alone? That Mainframe is the only system in cyberspace? I think not.
I now want to talk about Damon for a little bit. Damon's a lot different to the other viruses we've seen in the show. She seems to believe what she's doing is for the greater good, and she's basically a religious zealot, and like her infection is basically an analogy for organised religion, and she wants to infect everyone and bring unity to the nets. And but her noble intentions strip others of their free will.
I am Damon. I am the world. My format. Super virus. My function to bring unity to the net. All must hear the word.
But she does seem to care for those she infects, and she's kind to them, and she's like interested in the concept of romantic love, which is something she's not been programmed for. And the only time she ever acts with disdain towards anyone is when she sees that Hexadecimal has become a sprite, and she calls her an abomination, tosses her aside.
Hello? You must be Dot. Matrix has told me all about you.
Then you know what I think of viruses.
Fong, the wise one. It is an honor to finally meet you. And there is my messenger with... Hexadecimal. You have turned into an abomination. You are a disgrace to your kind.
She's not your kind anymore.
I'm just really happy that Hexadecimal messes her up. It's great.
Oh yeah, that was so satisfying. And that fight was really cool because they storyboarded it with comic book panels. They took panels from comic books of like Thor punching people going wham, and they used that to kind of plan how they were going to do the fight. I think one plot line I think that I wish got more time, because I think that was going to be a big part of the third story that they never made, was the ethics of Bob's views on viruses, because like it's basically the reverse of what viruses do. Bob wants to basically take a virus and change it into a sprite. So it's basically removing some of their free will. Like Hexadecimal changed into a sprite, but that was of her own free will, and even then she became a virus again. Like, I could be wrong, but my theory is the end of My Two Bobs would have ended with Megabyte becoming a sprite, and then the third story would have been the repercussions of that decision. And I've kind of had ideas of how that might have played out.
Well, that's what Bob always talked about. Well, no, sorry. When he said to Megabyte, you know, I can change you, and you know, you don't have to be this destructive force anymore. But then Megabyte replies, "Oh, a fate worse than death." You know, like that's what I like about Megabyte, is that he at no point does he ever want to be anything other than this evil monster that he is. So I think that, Yeah, no, I think whereas Hexadecimal would be more open to the idea of not being a virus anymore, I don't know, I think Megabyte would always fight to the end, which is very, it's one of the admirable things about him as a character.
So what now? Deletion?
No, just a scan. I don't believe in deletion.
You can't go against your code.
And neither can you. That's the problem. It's not your fault. You're programmed to be this way. We've just got to work out a way to reprogram you.
So, I won't be a virus?
That's the plan.
Ah, so, a fate worse than deletion. And they call me a monster.
I could go on all day, but I think let's move on to kind of the video game and the IMAX films, because those are some interesting things, I think.
Yeah, go on ahead.
So, yeah, there was a ReBoot game for the PS1, and what was cool about it was they actually got original cutscenes animated by Mainframe. Like, the game's not canon, but I think it's got some cool ideas, like hack and slash originally being one giant robot called Clash. And there was kind of a performance system where basically you play through the levels, and depending on your performance of the level, that depended on what cutscene you got. And like, to get the true ending, you've got to be like perfect in all the levels. But like, the problem was the gameplay's not the best. Like, I kind of enjoyed the game just because it's ReBoot, but it's not a great game. It's impossible to beat without using cheat codes.
Yeah, I like the cutscenes in the game. They're a lot of fun. I do feel like Mainframe got more, like the company Mainframe, sorry, they got a bit more creative freedom over what they could do with the animation. And that's definitely shown in like the dark endings of the game and the game over sequences, a lot of which are pretty sinister, if I say so myself.
Yes.
Like there's a particular one where Enzo gets his, I can't remember what they use it. Basically, his brain gets cut out, and it's a complete kind of
his frontal chip.
That's it, and it's a whole nod to the Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes movie, which is a great movie, my favorite sci-fi movies. But I thought that was pretty neat.
You took out his frontal chip, you barbarian! Soylent Green is Enzo!
Pretty creepy, to be honest. But I think it's widely accepted that the game is non-canon, if I'm not mistaken, because of the reverse command thing in the bad ending of the game.
Gavin and the actual creators of the show had nothing to do with the game. It's basically a whole separate team worked with EA on the game.
Yeah, but it just wouldn't make sense for the game to be canon, because in one of the bad endings where Enzo dies, I think, and Doc's like, oh no, my little brother's dead and stuff like that, Fong just like appears out
Bob
of
goes
nowhere.
back in time.
Yeah, he's just like, oh, there's a way we can save him with a reverse command, and then you can go back in time and undo this whole thing. And I'm just like, oh my god. If that was canon, that could just literally reverse every bad thing that happens in the entirety of ReBoot.
Yeah, but it's a nice nod to a video game save system, is the idea.
It is, but like I feel like it should be canon to only the video game timeline, if that makes sense.
There are also 2 IMAX ride films. The first is the one that's available online, although it's kind of weird because it's half someone videoing the ride, half clips from like a promo video, and it features Megabyte trying to capture a search engine called Maxine, who actually made a cameo in season 3, like halfway through, and it's a really fun kind of little adventure. Then the second one, which is sadly, it's mostly lost media aside from some clips that have made their way onto the internet, where you're going through Hexadecimal's mind with Mike the TV.
For one, I've seen a couple of those clips from that ride, and it looks terrifying. I don't think I'd ever want to go on a ride like that ever.
And at one point, this didn't actually make it to production. They actually planned a spin-off for preschoolers about the binomes, which probably wouldn't have the same writing quality as like later ReBoot, because it's for a much younger audience. But it would have been cute if they made it.
I think it would work. They're like little Lego characters, essentially.
Do we briefly want to address, before we go, the elephant in the room?
What's the elephant in the room?
That showed it's apparently a sequel to ReBoot, but is ReBoot in name only.
Oh, right, okay.
No.
Yeah, that basically says all we need to say.
Thank you, everyone. We're moving on. Yes, this has been a great talk. My favorite character is Hexadecimal. I would marry her, yes. Rob, who's your favorite character?
I've kind of said, for different reasons, I've got 3 favorite characters. Bob, I just love Bob because he's just so goofy and he's just so different from a lot of the stoic male main characters at the time. Dot, because she's like a great counterpoint to Bob as like kind of like a great female character. It's like she encompasses everything a great female character should be. And also Enzo for being like the most developed character in the show. Also, to say my favourite episode is Firewall. It's just amazing.
James.
Old Man Pearson is my favourite character.
Nice.
We haven't talked about him too much, but...
Is this because he called Megabyte a git?
Yes. But also, okay, yes, that is largely why I like him, because he calls Megabyte a nosy git.
I tell you now, like I told you before, I've got nothing, you nosy git. What are you, daft? Charming, as always.
But also, there's that plot twist involving Talon, and what appears to be a subtle story.
Oh, the Codemasters.
Yeah,
I love the. That is such a cool idea because it's basically this kind of like bounty hunters, but they never come up again.
I know. I think that's episode 2 of series 2. It's called High Code.
High Code, yeah. That's a really fun Western themed episode, yeah.
I'll go ahead and say that's also my favourite episode, and it's like a subtle story of redemption and in-depth character development. Like Old Man Pearson, despite being this goofball who's everyone a git, turns out to have this like kind of dark backstory where he's like a bounty hunter essentially, but he just couldn't take the killing and he decided to live in Mainframe and redeem himself. And there's this sort of idea of honour that he has and stuff. Despite his bad history, he becomes a good guy in the end. I like him. I think there's for a little sprite, he's got a lot going on for him. He's got a lot of facets to his character. So yeah.
And I like the painted world one.
And
Painted windows.
Yeah, that one.
Your favourite character as well?
I said it was Hexadecimal.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, so Ewan, before we go, do you want to mention what we're talking about next time?
Next time, we are discussing the utterly bizarre combination of Final Fantasy and Walt Disney, the video game series Kingdom Hearts, which is a favourite little video game of mine way back when, where you collect keys to close doors. And we're gonna do the first game. We're not gonna touch any of the later ones for convolution reasons. So thank you for listening, everyone. We're getting out of here. See you soon.
Yeah.
Until next time, the Bloobcast bids you farewell.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for listening.
I come from the net. I search through systems, peoples, and cities for this place. Mainframe, my home. My format, Guardian, to mend and defend. ReBoot!
Thank you for listening to Bloobcast. We've been Rob, James and Ewan. You can find all of our episodes on bloobcast.com. We're also available on SoundCloud, Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
We also have a YouTube channel where we produce shorter episodes called Blooblets, where we discuss the latest news in popular culture. You can find us on social media with @BlueCastPod on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Please like, follow and subscribe so you can get the latest updates on new episodes.
We also have an email address, which is bloobcast@outlook.com. So if you have any feedback or want to suggest things for us to review in our future episodes, please feel free to drop us an email and you'll get a shout out on the next episode. Please also rate and review us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. More engagement helps us a lot. And finally, please share the podcast amongst your friends and family. Help spread the word so that the Bloobcast empire can become strong and mighty.